Welcome into the Early Days podcast. This is the first episode today. I'm your host, Nick Triantos. Today, I'll be talking to a world-class innovator, speaker of thousands, from columnist to CEO, from Boston to Silicon Valley. This is my guest, Bill O'Connor. How you doing today, Bill?
I'm great, Nick. How are you? So excited to be here for this.
Oh, yeah, I'm fired up. You ready to rock and roll?
I'm ready to do it. Yeah.
Hell yeah. So Bill is a innovator. He has a very interesting career path. He started off as a columnist. So Bill, tell me a little bit about when you first started, because it's interesting how where you are now, how you were a columnist and then you were a speechwriter to a speaker, and now you own your own company. So run me back from the start.
Yeah, I'll give you the big picture. Yeah, I mean, in college I was liberal arts classic. I mean, long story short, I was a musician for years in London and then Boston, and I got into publishing in Boston. That led to the internet. My
Mm-hmm.
wife and I moved out to San Francisco because that's where the internet was going to be. So I was like a tech guy doing startups. Yeah, and then I got into working for a company called Autodesk as the CEO speechwriter
Yep.
and editor of this emerging technologies journal. Yeah, it's sort of in Silicon Valley, you can't help but pick up things about innovation. And I started this very particular innovation project called the Innovation Genome Project. Like you have the human genome and the business genome. And then, long story short, I started doing consulting about how to help companies innovate while still at Autodesk. And since then, basically, I've been running a small innovation agency using some of the techniques I developed there, but most of what I developed after I left Autodesk. And yeah, we just try to yeah, that's one of the things I'm excited to talk to you about when you tell me about the structure of the podcast, like starting from the
Yeah,
early days
definitely.
to
Yep.
now. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things is interesting. It's like, yeah, even people that are happy with their careers now and successful, it's like everyone had kind of a mess at the beginning. So
Yeah,
that's
you
my
don't know where
top
to go
level.
sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, from the jump, when you were first starting off, I know that you and your wife moved to LA or San Francisco. So tell me about that and how your thoughts of moving there. Was it scary? I know you found opportunity. The tech bubble was coming up. The internet was getting big. So, what were your thoughts on that? Like, what was going through your minds? Like the both of you. I know that you're in a relationship too. You're like, can we both go out there, be
That's true.
successful, and make this work?
It's kind of a funny point. So again, the big picture was, so we met in Boston,
Mhm.
and we knew we were going to be together. And she had gone to Santa Clara for undergrad. She was getting her MBA in Boston, and I just saw the internet hit. And I love Boston. I'm glad to be back here now, but at the time, I was just like, I said to her, I'm going to miss the revolution. Like it's all I know what's going to happen, and I'm going to miss it to some degree. And she kind of said, well, I'd like to go back out there for the weather and the culture and all this other stuff. So we moved out there. But you're right, we moved out there. I knew one person from online. She knew
Okay.
basically nobody. So it's
No
hard to think of
connections
it
out there.
now. But yeah, we moved out there knowing nobody. But this is the key thing. We both, and me especially, I felt like I knew what was going to happen with the internet. It was like, it's like when immigrants used to come to New York, I guess Irish too, and they'd
Yeah,
say, "Oh, the
yeah,
streets are paved with gold," and
yeah.
it's like it's not literal; it's metaphorical. It's
Yep.
opportunity. And I think it's the same thing. We didn't have a lot of money going out there, but the internet was happening there. So it was. You're right. It was scary, but we had some sort of a vision or a faith that sort of got us through it.
Yep. So you mentioned that vision, and when you have a vision, especially, I know, how young were you back then when you first were like, let's just ship it to San
Yeah,
Fran?
I was working in publishing in Boston. I was 30, so I wasn't
Okay.
that young. But yeah, 1993, a friend of mine at work, she literally, I remember the moment. She said, "Do you know there's a computer you can there's a program you can load into your computer and allow it to talk to all the other computers?" And my
Huh.
head just exploded. I was like, "Really?" So I was about 30 years old in 93
Yep.
when it came out, and I just sort of thought I'd be like a Boston publishing guy, and this derailed in a good way.
In a different
This
route,
vision
yeah.
derailed in a good way what was already a career that I liked, you know?
Yep. Okay. So you kind of were chat GBT and before chat GBT, right?
Well, I guess that's sort of a compliment. Yeah, I mean, it's Uh, yeah, I've always liked the next big thing, and so far I haven't been afraid of it. And Chat GPT is a part of that too. But yeah, I've
Yep.
always liked the stuff in the future. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So you move there and you're doing all this stuff. You get this new career and you start at Autodesk in San Fran. What was it, a couple years ago? Like probably like what, 15 years ago?
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, there's a phase before that. So yeah, it was 96 we moved out there, right?
Okay.
That was, I mean, the internet was hitting. So
Yep.
basically 1996 we moved out there. I did startups for probably about 6 years, really four different startups. And
And
by
what were
the
you
way,
doing in
my
there?
success rate is 2 for 2.
Okay.
Two fail,
100%.
two was it two? Yeah, two success, which is
In and
Silicon
out.
Valley. What's that?
In and out.
Yeah, in and out. Yeah, exactly. And then I started working in audits around 2002, and I worked there for more than 10 years.
Okay.
So I went from traditional Boston publishing to crazy startups for about 6 years to a classic Silicon Valley, San Francisco software company, Autodesk,
Mm-hmm.
and then to doing consulting. So that the jump from small companies and startups to big, and doing both of those. I whenever I was kind of bored at Autodesk or just thinking it was a great company, but my wife would say you're learning a lot at this thing, even if you don't see it. And of course, she was right. So it was the small companies and the big companies. I think that balance has helped me to be able to work with a wide range of my own clients, I would say.
So when you got the ball rolling and stuff like that with when you were at Columnist and you were transitioning to Autodesk, what were your thoughts in terms of like it was a big change, right? Because you change your whole career path right there, and it kind of leads into where you are now, and your companies in a way too. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But tell me what your thoughts were, if you remember when you were gonna go down that direction.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there was a dot-com bust, and there's so many startups were dying. Like it was really hard to find a successful startup. And a friend of mine, it was my wife's colleague's husband. He said, "I know he was working at Autodesk, and I had not thought of working at a big company, but I looked around. I mean, there was carnage everywhere. It was like everything was falling apart. And I was like, yeah, maybe a big company might not be bad for a while." So and by the way, this is interesting, I think, in terms of some of the concepts for your podcast. So for 6 years, I was like the internet guy,
Hmm.
right? But then when the internet, it crashed in the sense that just the bubble burst a bit. We know it still
With the
grew.
companies. Yep.
Then, yeah. And then when I got back to Autodesk, I wasn't the internet guy. I went back to branding, marketing, copywriting. I went back to the stuff that I was good at before that. And so this is something I tell young people now. It's like, that was stepping back to go forward. But yeah, at the time I thought, oh, this is kind of a bummer. I guess I'm not doing internet stuff anymore. And that's
Yeah.
the problem with thinking the future is thinking the future.
Definitely, yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that because like I deal with the certain things, like I've tried different things and failed at it. For a long time I was trying to do something. I was trying to trade, day trade. I found a lot of success. I made a lot of money that most people don't know. And
Yeah.
then everything I was reinvesting, and then as you know, with like COVID too, I thought I was gonna be a millionaire by like 25. I made a lot of money.
Yeah.
But everything, most of it gone. And
Sure.
it kind of messes with your mind. And I don't know if you dealt with something like this because it sort of sounds like you saw this industry and it somewhat failed. And you're like, okay, maybe I'll go back to it. But right now, that's not the
Yeah,
destination.
I'll draw a parallel between our two experiences. So you just described what you went through. The parallel I'd say is my identity as a professional. Starting, I mean, really, in '93, the minute I saw the internet, I was like, well, I'm basically an internet guy, even though I wasn't working, and I knew. So really, from '93 to kind of 2002, so sort of like 9 years, my
Okay.
identity was I am an internet guy. I'm right on the cusp of the future. And then, really, you're right. To take the job at Autodesk, I had to say, well, I'm now an unemployed guy. I'm not an internet guy. I still love technology. We're going to still live in San Francisco. So it was a change. I guess this is the thing. It was a change of identity from
Hmm.
being like the internet guy to
To
like,
relooping.
just another tech guy.
Yep.
But I mean, this is again where lessons can come in, I think, from the people you're going to interview. It's like, I had no idea how cool it would be to work at Autodesk and what it would lead me to. I had to be open up to change my identity from A to B, and B ended up being better than I could have thought. But as you said, it's painful to acknowledge you failed, and to pivot is painful, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's painful
And
for everybody.
how young were you at that time? Or what was
I
your age?
was, I mean, it was almost a midlife crisis. I think I was like when the crash started, I was really like 38 years old.
Okay.
So I guess I started in 96 when I moved out there. So sort of from when I was 33 to about 38 or 39, it
Mm-hmm.
was just all gravy. I mean, it was like six launch
Black and
parties a
white.
night. Like it's everything that you've heard about. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there I was at 39 years old. That's not super young. It seems young to me now, but yeah, I so that was another thing. It's like, who am I at 39?
So it
And
feels
and
like
of
you're
course,
gonna be pressured,
yeah.
right?
What's that?
There's a lot of pressure at that time too. You're saying like, who am I? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, that's the question. Who am I? And again, it's a cliche, but I think it's true, especially in the United States, guys are define their identity by their jobs. This is all shifting, but traditionally, guys are I am my job,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a bit of that too. It's funny. My wife, of course, had supporting me and saying, "Look, I know who you are. You had this incredible run. You'll have another great run again. Right now." It's how can you find work at startups? The startups
Mm-hmm.
are all imploding. So that's the other thing. It's like, yeah, I had a great, my wife
Support.
was incredibly supportive. And again, it wasn't terrible. It was like a year dip when I was like, all right, what's going on? But to have someone to support you, I mean, obviously that's, if you can get that, that's great too.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of kids, at least my age, going down a certain route and they don't understand where they want to go. I know we've talked about this before. Like a lot of kids that I know, like they don't know where the hell they are in life and what they want to do. They're just going into things just to go into it. Whether it's being stereotypical and being like, I have to go down
Yeah.
this route and I have to do this. I got to go to school. I can't do it any other way. Why
Yeah.
be different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So give me a rundown, like how you changes your whole shift too. You're by yourself in San Fran and
Yeah.
you're like, it's kind of like fight or flight and you need to go
Yeah.
finish the job, right?
Yeah, yeah. I would say, I think of it this way. I'll give you two answers to that. Um, Traditionally, and you're in your 20s, for the last, say, 30 or 40 years, you graduate, it's fairly typical for people in their 20s to try to figure out what to do, right? So I went to a good school. Even if you go to a good school, there's that level of confusion at times. By the way, that's if you're open to it, as you said. So I went to a professionally focused school. I went to Franklin and Marshall in Pennsylvania. Shout out. A lot of future doctors and lawyers and diplomats and everything. So a lot of people at F&M, as it's called, they sort of knew where they were going. So, okay, good. If you do that, the danger can be, how are you picking so young that you know what you're doing? Like I know a lot of doctors
You
from
never
F&M who
know.
are, no, they're happy today. I think I know more people that have become lawyers that maybe are questioning it. So, but I guess my point is that it's fairly traditional. You got to figure out what you're doing in your 20s. But these days, this is, I think, why we started talking. I was like, man, I think it's exponentially crazier to figure out what you're doing these days in your 20s. And by the way, that's from someone who still loves the Silicon Valley, like, been in Silicon Valley 25 years. It is in some ways the best time to be young. I mean, look what
Mm-hmm.
you're doing right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're as a person, you're in a chaotic time. You're 22, right?
Yep.
As a person, but also as a professional. Look at this. Look at this setup we've got here. It's like you couldn't
Exactly.
do this. You couldn't do this even 10 or 15 years ago.
Yep.
So in some ways, it's a great time to be young. But I understand that, I mean, especially with AI, which we should talk about, I understand how the traditional sense of like, what am I doing in my 20s has gotten worse. That's my sense. And I think you've
I believe
confirmed
that
that a lot
too.
of people
Yep.
are either trapped in jobs that they just sort of got into or they don't know what they're doing, right?
Yeah. I mean, most of it, I mean, I'm most of the people, most of my friends, some of them are working, but a lot of people just graduated school. And
Yeah.
I ask around too. Like I'll visit like my friends' schools and I'll ask around, be like, hey, like, what do you want to do? Like, what are your plans after school? I don't know. I'm gonna look for a job somewhere, whatever gets me the most money. And I mean, to me, you can go that route, but I think that's just absolutely miserable. I feel
Yeah.
like you're capable of way more, and unfortunately, that most people can't see that in themselves.
Well, the funny thing I would say, as someone my age, and this is a little bit snarky, I would have said this to my earlier self. Oh, you're going to go for the job with the most money. You're 22. It's like your value in the market is the lowest it's ever going to be. So actually, that's kind of irrational in a way, because it's like, yes, me, if I'm a 22-year-old graduate from a good school, but that's all I have. Okay, right now is the time you're going to try to maximize money versus trying to do something you like. That's not logical. I mean, it's logical to always look to get paid well, sure, but to do that at
Some
22,
security.
yeah, I mean, secure. Of course, it's important, yeah, but I guess it's also that thing. It's like you can go for something that you love. Not in. It's not that whole thing. Do what you love, the money will follow. Like that was a book, and it's like
Yeah.
that's a little too optimistic.
Yeah.
But look, the people I know that are happy in their 50s, 60s, 70s, they sort of got into something they love, and as they got good at it, the money started to come. You can't do the other flip. Usually, if you start something because of the money, you can keep getting more money, but you can't also add the love of the thing usually.
Hmm.
You can go one way, but not the other, you know? So I think it's just logical within reason to try to find something you like or love and then get better at that and make money. Sounds obvious. Than going the other way, because you can't jump the fence the other way that easily, I don't think.
Yeah.
You
So
know?
it's kind of like, if not this, then what, in a
Yeah,
way, right? Did
exactly. Yep.
so when you were in the beginning of your career, did you ever think of, like, when you moved there, did you ever think like, this has to work? I don't have a plan B. I want it to work.
This is, you know why that's such a great question, because the thing I'm going to say to you, I've never thought of before, really. I was about to say to you that we had moved completely, so it had to work. But because my sense of a vision for the internet being the next big thing, I'm not kidding, Nick. I am sure of this. Not one time, is this true? No, not one time, a single moment that I can remember, did I think, well, this might fail and I'll go back to Boston and fail. Not a second. And again, I guess you could say it's irrational, but I mean, look, I love to say this too, but I was completely right. It's like when I got there, it was just getting crazy and the opportunities were unbelievable. But this is actually a good point. Like, I never had that sense that it's not going to work,
Hmm.
because I was so sure about what was going to happen with the internet that
And
I just felt
yourself.
like, what, yeah, and me too. Exactly. Yeah. But actually, that's a good point too. I don't know if I had boundless faith in the internet, and I had enough faith in myself, because by that point I knew it was going to be big for the last 3 years. Yeah, I had faith in the thing I was going to do and in myself enough that I never occurred to me that I would fail. I don't know how
Yeah.
useful that is, because most people think about
Oh,
that. I think I was lucky
I
in a
understand.
way.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah, you almost have to be a little delusional
it's true.
sometimes.
It's so, I mean,
I'm
if you look at entrepreneurs, that's sort of the joke, the crazy entrepreneur, and it's crazy only in the paradigm of like having a vision. Like my company right now, we're a consultancy and we're starting a SaaS platform, right? So
Mhm.
okay, there's a if you think that thinking working on something that doesn't exist yet, yeah, that's a little crazy. It's
Yep.
also how everything in the world is created, Yeah, but by the way, that the other thing
That's
is,
innovation right there.
that is innovation right there. But you hit on something really good, which is like, so if I were to talk to people in their 20s, this sounds like I'm being glib, but it's like, if you can find that thing that you either just love so much or you're so sure is going to change everything, like AI, um, getting into that, it's almost like, I don't know, surfing, catching the perfect wave. That's another metaphor. It's like, metaphorically, in 96, I thought I was a pretty good surfer, but I especially knew this wave is going to get me.
See a
So that's
shark.
why, and by the way, just as a jump, we're talking to Nobel Prize winners now to see how they innovate. One of the surprising things that we found is Nobel Prize winners, most of them are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, but the way they pick projects along the way
Mhm.
is very interesting. And they just are very good at picking things with massive potential or that people are afraid of. So that's something else I'd say to someone in the 20s, picking that what's your lane, picking your lane is could be difficult, but once you're in the right lane, like, as I remember, I didn't have any doubts because I was in the right lane. So that's the thing. If you can find your lane, it just makes everything a lot easier, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. You're talking, so you're doing case studies upon Nobel Prize winners, right? And how they innovate. Can you touch up a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. Um, Basically, when I was still at Autodesk around 2011, I started this thing called the Innovation Genome Project. And the goal was to really codify how people have innovated for millions of years. The first innovation in human history, 3.5 million years ago, the stone hand axe in Dakika, Africa, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the first, that's when we started innovating. That's proto humans, even earlier than humans, basically halfway between apes and us, right? So for years, we did that. We basically started with historical. Throughout the years there, up until like 2018, we also studied Silicon Valley. I mean, in retrospect, you can see we started with historical innovations.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to help people innovate, let's look and see how people have done it. That's pretty
Well, it's
obvious.
all cyclical, right? To some
Yeah.
degree.
Well, it's cyclical in the sense that the famous phrase is history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme, right?
Okay.
And it's like, yes. So I mean, that's what really helped this project get off the ground. I could see patterns that were taking place when people tamed fire, and I could apply it to tech companies in 2014. That was the big thing. But so anyway, one was historical. Two, the source of innovation was Silicon Valley. And you ask about Nobel. One day it occurred to me, like, well, what other sources of innovation are there? And it hit me. I was walking down the street. It was like, oh, Nobel Prize winners. And then I got a little mad at the Nobel Foundation because I was like, they don't do any studies of how these people do it. Like, say your uncle had won the Nobel Prize. Your uncle
Hmm.
Fred, they ask him what he did. He
I
did
never
this.
thought
No,
about it like that.
you see what I mean? Because what your uncle Fred did, that's not relevant to you, me, or anyone else, except people in his field. But how he
So,
did it,
what are something like? Give me an example.
I would say, all right, finding the Higgs boson, or in finance, in economics, that's a great example. Finding like Amartya Sen from India. He did all this amazing stuff about the poor and how to help the poor and how not to help the poor and how government programs don't work and all this stuff, right? So that's a good example. He was an expert at that, and he made it very powerful, and he won for that. But so when we talk to him, this is I think why they agree to talk to us. It's like he's talked about what he did his whole life.
Not how
Every
he did it.
journalist cares about what he did. I sort of say, I don't care what you did. I care how you did it. You see the difference?
Yeah.
How did you think in those early days about poor people and this and that? Because Nick, once I see how he did it, I can say, oh, this how, I can tell it to Nick. I can tell it to myself. You see the difference?
Well, the
So
how's
that,
kind of
yeah,
relative to what you're saying, like the history. It rhymes, right? Because you'll see it.
yeah,
I bet you see patterns between all of them to some degree.
100%. Well, this is the cool thing. I see resonances or patterns between, let's say, the caveman, the Silicon Valley person, and the Nobel Prize winner.
What about
By the way,
me?
we're deep enough that we see things that are underpinnings to all of them. Yeah, yeah.
What about
So that's
me?
an example you're saying.
Of me?
What's that?
Nah, I'm just joking.
Oh, of you, yeah. Well, listen. At some point, you got that. That's good confidence you have there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um,
rewind a little bit.
yeah.
Something that I find really fascinating about you is when you were writing speeches and you started getting into you. This is when I feel like your career really started rolling. I don't
Yeah.
know. I feel like could you touch up upon like you were at Autodesk, you started writing speeches for CEOs, you started going out talking to companies, the
Yep.
Apples, the big companies that everyone uses.
Yep.
So give me the rundown on that.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. This kind of a funny story. So again, top level. Around 2006, a CEO called Carl Bass started. He became CEO. Right. He's a
Of what
great
company?
guy for Autodesk.
Okay.
This at Autodesk. That's like the only big company I've worked for. So again, big picture from 2006 to 2011, I was the CEO speechwriter. We created probably 200 to 250 speeches, presentations, articles, right? And a lot of it was about innovation. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, one of the first talks we did was he said, okay, the Chinese government, this is back when that was less of a political thing, it was like they want to know about how do you educate for innovation? I
Mm-hmm.
went off, did a bunch of research. I did this. I wrote some stuff. We talked. It's his speech, but work on it together. So there we have one in the file of education innovation. Then we do one on invention versus innovation. Good. Now we got that one. And these all came with what we thought were like perfectly crafted ideas and words and good visuals, and we get videos and everything. And then we would do, is innovation a group thing or is it an individual thing? So we were doing all this stuff, and now I call it innovation poetry. It was just yap, yap, yap. It was talking. It's like a sports commentator. It's a sports commentator who doesn't play basketball, and that's okay.
Skip
Some of the best
Bayless.
coaches in basketball and analysts are not players. That's fine,
Yeah,
but
for
still.
sure.
So
Some of
you
them
asked
stink though, Bill.
which ones?
I mean, all I like is like Stephen A, Shannon
I
Sharp.
love Stephen A. Yeah.
Skip
Oh, a lot of them.
Bayless, nah,
Yeah.
he's not about it.
No, 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 no. And he's in trouble now because Shannon's leaving. Do you hear
Yeah,
this?
he's trying to get LaShawn McCoy on there.
I think so. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
Stephen A. Smith.
Yeah, nah, he's a good guy. No,
He's
Skip
good.
Bayless is trying to get LaShawn McCoy. Shannon Sharp's going to go to
Oh,
Stephen
right.
A.
I think he is. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so, oh yeah. Anyway, so what's the point? So going back to the thing versus talking about something versus doing it. So then I started giving some of the speeches, partly because there was so much demand for these types of speeches. They mostly want the CEO, but it was like, yeah, the company's coming in. They hear you have all this on innovation, and then at some points they want you give the talk. So then I started giving it, and people. This is a good problem to have. I think around 2011, say a company, say Nike is there, say Starbucks is there, say Tesla is there. They're all Autodesk customers, right? So
Okay.
they come in or someplace, they'd hear a talk on innovation. They'd say, that was a great talk. Sign me up for the training program.
When
And
you
I would
started
go,
talking to them.
well, no, yeah, I would talk to them, but I would say to them, I don't have a training program. I'm just talking. It's poetry. It's about innovation. I can't actually help you do it. And I would say, if it's Nike, I'd be like, isn't that your job? Or whatever it is. So anyway, to answer your question, at some point I really started to feel a little bad that we were revving up these executives, and they come up and we'd say, well, that's all we have. You want, I can read the speech to you again, but that's it. And I said to my boss, who was the head of strategy, I think I need another job. I had 3 jobs at the time, really. CEO, speechwriter. I was the editor of an emerging tech journal. And even at the time, I was working a little bit on innovation. I
You got a
said,
lot on your
I,
plate then.
I did. Yeah. Said, I want to study 1,000 innovations in history. And that way I will know, I will be able to create tools and methods. So when someone comes to me from a great company, I can say, oh, you want to innovate? Try this.
So
Try
that's
that.
when you started going out to companies and talking.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned to me that you got some pretty funny stories about when you just pull up on heads of companies and they would
Yeah.
just be a domino effect of just everyone wanting to talk to you. I
Yeah.
mean, you are a good talker. I know we both like talking, but
Yeah.
tell
Yeah.
me, give me the story of,
I'll
give me
tell
the
you.
craziest story, just pulling up to a meeting and blowing whoever's company's
Yeah,
minds.
I'll tell the one that I think you're referring to. So, and I think I can say all this. Yeah, this reflects well on the company too. So, as a company, this is around 2016, maybe. A company called Royal Bank of Scotland, and now they're called NatWest. At the time, I think they were $16 billion. So big, basically British company.
It's a
I think
big
at the time
boy.
based in London, right? What's that?
That's a big boy.
It's a big one, yeah. This was very symmetrical the way it happened. I hope I can get all the names right. Carolyn White, yeah. So anyway, the first time someone emailed me, or no, they saw me on LinkedIn, and they said, "Hey, I see you doing this interesting work." And I probably had posted 1 or 2 things about the innovation genome. She said, "Could I come in and talk to you? I'd just like to talk to you to hear what you're doing." And even at
And
that
this
time,
was already when you were doing all this talking to and innovating for companies, right?
yeah, well, I would call it this way. This was the whole project started in 2011. Yeah, actually, by this time, I was out and about talking about. You're right, talking about this a lot. and we were into like our third research year. So somehow she heard about it. So she came in. She was an independent consultant, and I was impressed. She had gone to Cambridge University in the UK, which you can debate, is it Oxford or Cambridge, but that's incredible. It's like, this woman's going to be smart, right? So she came in. Again, I'm sort of running in from my other job. Hi, nice to meet you. What can I talk to you about? Like, because I have to go in like 29 minutes. And she's like, well, I just wanted to hear about the blah, 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 the innovation. And I would, with no notes, go, okay, oh, geez, I got 28 minutes. All right, this is the thing. We did this. You should do this. Are you guys
Mine's
innovating?
blown.
What's that?
Mine's blown right there. Like you're
Yeah.
a lunatic.
Well, let's just say, Nick, it's not normal, right?
Yeah.
But I realized I couldn't have predicted this. That approach, I was not polite. I was not over rehearsed. And by the way, I'm not that good with manners anyway, but that became part of my actual style. This whole, I mean, it's almost like I'd walk out and say, hey, everybody, listen, I know you don't innovate. No, shut up. I'll tell you why, back. And that's why I like being in Boston too. It's like, it's a
Is that
very kind of
actually how it
Boston.
went? You would
Oh,
literally just be like, you don't know what the hell you're
oh,
saying?
again, at the risk of seeming a little arrogant, well, I would, my version of that, this is an aside from the story, right? But my version of that would be, I would say, okay, I've done this many times. You guys are a $14 billion company, right? Yes. Who here, at the risk of being obvious, who here thinks innovation is important? All hands go up. How many people how many innovations has your company done in the last 3 years? Name one.
None.
And usually nobody raises their hand. And
Really?
then I make them laugh and I say, okay, on one hand, you're all saying it's important. On the other hand, nobody's doing it, and then I would usually say, I can't help you, goodbye, and pretend to leave, or something like that. But this is what breaks through. Again, the innovation world is weird. I'm jumping topics a bit because it's very ill defined. So, there's a certain like politeness about, oh, we're doing all these cool projects. And that's not how I define innovation. Innovation is when you establish something in the world,
Well, it's
like
always
an iPhone or
changing.
something that's newer, different, has a good impact, right?
I mean, the
Anyway,
iPhones don't change much now, but
no, well, that's a great point. The first iPhone, innovation level 10. Ever since then, but to Apple's credit, Tim Cook hasn't done a lot. But this new Apple Vision, the thing that just came out, the
yeah, I saw
visor,
that. It's like four
that
thousand dollars.
what's that?
$4,000.
Yeah, with all the stuff. Oh, I know. Well, that could sink it right there.
It's a
That could be a problem.
mortgage.
Yeah, but anyway, let me finish. I've gotten off track. So this was an example. So first person comes in, she's a researcher for them, right? And she says, this is great. And then she emails me and says, that was great. Could I bring my boss in? And I was like, oh, okay. You going to come too? Okay. This was like a week later. So her boss is named John Stewart, who's now a friend of mine. Hi, John. I'm sure I'll send this to him. Um, John Stewart comes in with Catherine. Yeah, that was her name, Catherine. So Catherine and John. So it's meeting number two people. I do the same thing. And again, it's like, oh, hey, John, I got 42 minutes. Let me just, I say, Catherine, you're going to be bored. She's like, no, say the same stuff. I was like, okay. I do that. Goodbye. Didn't expect to see them again. I get an email. It was probably a month later. John says, my boss would like to come see you. This guy was head of innovation for the whole company. John was the scout for innovation in Silicon Valley.
So he
And a
was
great,
leading it. So he was definitely ticked off that everyone's raving about you.
who? John?
Yeah, he might have, I feel
No,
like.
well, but see,
No?
well, listen, by the way, let's park that because I often say as a consultancy, our biggest competitors are the big consultancies, the innovation consultancies, and internal teams because they love us or hate us. But actually,
Hmm.
John, who's very smart and confident, John was the one, he's the scout in Silicon Valley of innovation. He brought his boss in, the head of innovation for the company. His name was Kevin. And so there I was, I believe all three of them were there. So like, oh, meeting number 3. And by this time, I think I left a little more time. So I was like, listen, you guys keep coming in here. What do you really want? And then I started grilling them. And then the punchline of the story is maybe 2 months later, I get an email from Kevin and he says, the CEO of the company is coming to San Francisco. He'd like to talk to you. And it's almost like a prank because it was 1, 2, 3, 4,
The
right?
domino effect.
So to wrap the story up, I think I told you this. So Ross McHugh, an incredible guy. Now he's at another bank, but incredible executive and a great guy. He comes in. And I remember I said to him, I'm sorry, I only have 41 minutes. And I kept saying that. I was like, I don't know what you're going to get out of this in 41 minutes. Right. And so my memory of it, I had no notes. I kind of wanted to tip them over to either go do innovation on their own or maybe work with me in some way. I don't know. So I was at the board, I was ranting, and now I got the CEO there. I'm saying, I said, how much time did you spend innovating last week? Zero. Am I right? And he'd be like, yeah, pretty much, although he was pretty innovative. So I feel like in the context of a business meeting, I was like kind of like a crazy man, but I was real. And I was saying things like, don't talk about innovation unless you're going to do it. It's better for a company. Just don't pretend unless you want to just convince the shareholders and then do a good job, but it's still fakery, right? And then I said to him, I said something like, but if you did real innovation, it's such an incredible advantage. Look at Apple versus. So I was really at the end challenging them. And so this was a great moment in my career. So I'd say 2 weeks later after they leave, he writes me a note on this beautiful, like president of a bank, CEO of a bank stationery. And he said, Bill, thank you so much for hosting us. And the phrase that I highlighted in his note, he said, for 41 minutes, you inspired and you terrified us. And I was like, yes, that's what I'm supposed to do. You
Just
know,
highlight the terrified
I
part.
did. I highlighted that because that is actually my goal now. Jumping off the story, it's like, yeah, I guess. I mean, I know this. Partly it helped me working with the CEO of Autodesk, who's a down to earth guy. When the CEO of another company comes in, it's like, yeah, I used to say in Boston, everybody in the world is just a schmuck that has a telephone. A schmuck with that's my New York upbringing, right?
Yeah.
But so anyway, that story to wrap it up, that's an example of how I wasn't ready to go out with this to the world, but because I was at a big company, they kind of found me, and that's actually theoretically that's kind of a good way to do something. You're not focused on what will people think. You're always trying. Whenever I was brought into a room with 28 minutes, I was always like, how can I help these people? It was never about my ego. It was never about is Bill O'Connor good. It was always like Bill O'Connor's busy. Bill O'Connor hasn't had damn lunch yet. Bill O'Connor wants to get out, but I really want to help them. And I actually do think, looking back, like those are my early days in a way, building that level of I am too busy to not be honest, that was lucky in a way. Because if I had made a big thing out of it, you want to be successful, you might be more polite, you might want to do anything to get the next gig. So anyway, I think I don't know if there's a lesson in there, but it's being genuine, it's good work if you can
To
get
see
it.
your character, yeah.
Yeah, and your character and your honest personality. Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So do you think that when you were doing this, what was your compensation? Because you were still at Autodesk. So was your
Yeah,
compensation, you were
nothing.
networking a shitload right
Yeah, I
there.
was. Yeah. My
So
my I was not getting paid. Well, there were three levels to it, right? Phase one was I was doing my other jobs at Artis and I would get pulled into these meetings as a favor to salespeople or to the executives. Phase two,
so you weren't getting
well,
paid in the beginning?
no, not getting paid at all. Well, I was
Oh
getting
wow.
paid my salary for being a speechwriter and an editor, but I was not getting paid for this new thing, right?
Okay.
That was phase one. Phase two, I was getting companies saying, "Do you do any consulting outside of Autodesk?"
And
And
that just
again,
rang the
try to
bell.
be ethical. I went to my boss and I said, "John, I just want you to know they're asking me to do outside consulting. What do you think about that?" And fortunately, John was my boss. There was another guy on my team whose name was Tom, and he was and is a famous thought leader. And he said, just do what Tom does. Take the day off. It's fine. It's not even a conflict. So phase two was, I'm mostly working at Autodesk, but then I'm going to London. I'm going to Scott. I was flown by IKEA, going to Sweden, but when combined with a vacation with my wife. So phase one, doing it for free at Autodesk. Phase two, still working at Autodesk, but sometimes doing outside consulting. And phase
So
three
are
was now
these
just on my own. What's
are
that?
these trying to start to like ring a bell in your head that because you have your company now, where is it starting to just go, maybe I can do this by myself, consult
Oh
now
yeah.
to have this clientele? So when
Oh
was
yeah.
at that point where you like, let me make this next leap? Because that's just another part of the road that
Yeah.
uncertainty too there that could blow up in your face too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And this was before. I'm thinking this is 2 years before the pandemic. But this is the thing. Like, I wouldn't say I'm a great or even good like sales forecaster, but the numbers, but for the 7 years I was at Autodesk doing this, I had done 300 engagements with companies, and it was sort of like with 100 companies from 45 countries. And at that point, I thought, look, this could be dumb to think I can do this, but
With
and
compensation?
what's that?
Was that the with compensation, all those companies? Or that was just the
No, this
salary?
no. Well, put it this way: out of in from 2011 to 18, when I was still at Autodesk, out of all of those, I would say 10% were paid outside the company. Most of them were right at the company, basically
S-
not getting paid. So I didn't
So
monetize it
how
that much.
much is a company how much does a company charge for you to go there?
Uh, you mean to go and consult?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really want to say,
Okay.
but it's well, here I'll pivot that. It's more than we are now charging for the innovation platform that we're building. Commercial, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean seriously, it's yeah, I mean when I especially before COVID, when I would go to a place, you're well compensated. I'll just put it that way. So yeah, and then that was the funny thing. I knew I would come back when I was still at Autos. I'd come back from a consulting gig, and I'll put it to you this way: I would get paid for 1 day's work, sometimes what, a week or two salary at Autodesk. Maybe that's not so braggy. And at some point, I started to think, okay, this is this is good work if you can get it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
you make a consulting company, and I know what you're doing now. You're actually trying to innovate within your company.
yeah,
Um, how do you manage your competition? I mean, I don't know many innovation companies. How do you innovate in your innovation
yeah.
business?
It's a good question. Yeah. Well, the first answer is for a lot of the history of, so the company has been called Agents of Innovation, right? And now we're launching something called Innovista. That's our SaaS platform. For Agents of Innovation, the funny thing is every once in a while I'd say to my partners, it's funny. We're teaching people to innovate. We're not innovating. Like our stuff about innovation is the same. So every once in a while, I would use our tools on our company, and of course, when we did, it really worked. But there's something, I mean, this is the phrase about the cobbler's kids. Is that it? Like if your dad makes shoes, sometimes your shoes aren't so good. They just don't even think of it.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so the short answer is uh, at times we were just doing well with the innovation stuff I had come up with, and we wouldn't innovate that much. So we were being a little hypocritical. But now, as I think I mentioned, now we're building this whole SaaS platform. We're trying to innovate every day in some ways. So I guess that's by way of saying I'm snarky when I say to a big company, you guys haven't innovated in like 12 years. I know it's hard to do. And I know it's hard to take the time when you're making money in one way to literally say, why don't we blow up some of that and take a break on the revenue, and let's just see if we can do this new thing,
Yeah, it's
But so
hard.
to answer your question, it's not natural even for an innovation company to always innovate. Now we're doing because we're building something new, you know?
Yeah. So if you had to go back, we're gonna wrap this up.
Yeah.
If you had to go back when you're 20 years old, starting your career, whatever, what piece of advice would you give yourself if you could?
Oh boy, I know that's a famous question, but I'm literally have to think about this for a second. What advice would I um
Like if you can remember what you were thinking, and you're like, in 10 years, I want to be here, and maybe it's like slow down, do this, or like take opportunities. What would it be?
yeah, I think I would say the following. One thing I would say, yeah, it's a good question. I'm a little stumped by it. The thing that I'll riff on it for a second and then hit an answer. I would still say to Bill at that age, keep this focus that you have on kind of everything. That's going to help you. The one piece of advice I might give, though, would be, and by the way, I have attention deficit disorder. This is partly that. I might say, keep that focus on everything and the future. Like if I could, so Nick, if I could give the advice but not tell that Bill what was going to happen, I'd say, look, keep that I can't tell you because Nick said I can't, right? But like keep that wide focus. That's going to help you. But I might say, I know what I would say. I would say when I was in a particular situation leading up to this cool stuff, I would say, be more in the moment, focus more on it would be really focused more on whatever I was doing at the time. I feel like I was kind of waiting for something. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Were you
I
in
would
a
say
rush at all?
no. The thing I'm trying to say in this very Silicon Valley is I would say to Bill, make things. Don't put things off and make things. Because actually, I did start a few companies. So that it's funny. That's what I would say. I would say don't procrastinate. I would say it's funny. Exactly what you're doing right now. Ironically, it's that's what I would say. Like
Thank
I
you.
had so yeah. No, I'm not. I'm serious. Like I had so many ideas even in my 20s. Now that I think about it, and that I didn't act on because I was always on to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, I got
So
ideas too like that, and I
yeah,
think it goes all the way back to what we were saying in the beginning, how people don't take action, and you just got
yeah,
to do it sometimes. Because
yeah.
like, even if it's like a hobby or something, it might work out, might not. But
Yeah. Well,
would
it's
you
funny.
rather not do it?
Yeah, podcasts have helped with that because it's relatively easy to start. And like, again, like if somehow we were back in time and you were 22 in the early 90s, it's like, oh man, basically that'd be like starting a TV show by yourself, right?
Yeah,
So this is the other thing though. I'm combining my advice with the current thing. So I know it's crazy for people, young people, but it's like I would say given all the tools you have today, like AI, et cetera, um, make things. Don't procrastinate. The classic things. Make them for yourselves. Share them with your friends. As an thinking economically to young people in general, it'd be like, yeah, the classic. Depending on a large company, that's getting more difficult. And by the way, the business writer Tom Peters has been saying, don't depend on giant companies. He's been saying it for 30 years, but still now. So I would say it's a combination. I'd say both those things. Keep an eye out for like wide lens for the next thing that's coming. And by the way, there are things after AI,
for
and
sure.
but also try to make things. Don't procrastinate. Make things. Try things. Try things out. Experiment by doing. This is all very classic Silicon Valley stuff. But yeah, I didn't do enough of that. I would say I didn't do enough of taking the idea. I won't tell you what it is. I'll
I
close with
think you
this.
did just fine, Bill. I
I
don't know
think I
about
did.
that.
Thank you, my friend. Fist bump it out.
Everything
Yeah.
happens for a reason, man.
Yeah, yeah, that's another good way to look at it too. But yeah, so I would say that, and I think that's relevant today because, again, put it this way: there's more chaos for people in the 20s maybe ever have been, and there's more chaos and capability. There are more tools, and we're more networked. So that's something I would say. I would say don't procrastinate as much as I did, and make stuff.